Welcome back. It is the Jeff Santos Show. We're going to go out west, the great state of Washington, and talk to our good friend, journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield. And Mark, is great to have you back on the program. Happy Tuesday.
Hey, you too, Jeff. It's great to talk to you again.
Great to have you on the program. Look, we were talking with our good friend John Nichols about this. There's some great scenarios that have happened in Seattle, Wisconsin. We talked about this not too long ago. And, there is a lot of races. We all know about Ed Murray beating incumbent Mayor Mike McGinn to become Seattle's first openly gay mayor. And there's some others out there. I think that who ran from, and I think these are still being counted, some of these races, people who identified with the Occupy movement that we talked about before. Give us the latest from the Pacific Northwest.
Actually, even though Initiative 522, the genetically modified food organism labeling initiative, went down, it was very, very close. So we're talking within 4 percentage points, and that was with the No on 522 campaign, which included Monsanto, DuPont, Dow Chemical, the Grocery Manufacturers Association. They spent 3 times as much money, millions of dollars poured into the state, just like it did in California when they had a similar ballot measure. So it proves that although they were able to pull off a win this time, it is a trend. It's trending towards more popularity. And, it was a significant victory for the Yes on 522 campaign that they could come so close with so little financial support, even though they had David Bronner from Dr. Bronner's Soap and all sorts of really interesting organic food co-ops behind them, and all of the central co-ops and PCCs here in Seattle. They still were able to pull that off. As far as the Occupy candidate goes, that was Kasama Sawant. And she is actually a self-proclaimed Occupy candidate. She got a lot of support from former Occupy folks. And as of today, the separation between her and the incumbent, Richard Conlon, is only 1,200 votes. So it's very, very close, and it's a statistical tie. It's another example of folks who were only able to raise, I think, $30,000, and with no corporate sponsors, were able to get the word out. They wanted to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, which, by the way, did pass in SeaTac, Washington, which is a community just south of Seattle. But her candidacy was very popular, and she got a lot of support. So it goes back to something that I've talked about before, the opportunities for people in the Occupy movement to organize themselves politically and get something done. The takeaway from that is that Richard Conlon, who's been on the council for so many years, I can't even remember when he wasn't, his seat is now vulnerable. He does not have a monopoly on that city council seat now. Whatcom County, Jeff, which is something that nobody seems to be talking about, although the Green Report and Brad Friedman down there at KPFK mentioned it, and that is that Whatcom County elected 4 new Democrats to their county commission, and all of those candidates have said publicly that they will vote against giving a permit for a major coal port that was scheduled to go in Bellingham, and that would have exported 48 million tons, of coal per year to China. That looks like it's not going to happen now. So the coal trains that everybody has been worried about coming through the Northwest just doesn't look like it's going to happen. The city of Seattle and all of our elected officials are against it. County commissioners in Bellingham are against it, so they're going to have to find another port. And then, it was interesting to me that Ed Murray, our new mayor, who I got to interview actually, to the rest of the country, he is the first, he was actually the first openly gay state legislator in Washington state. But what I noticed, Jeff, is that during the campaign, his sexual preference never came up. That's just Seattle politics now. I mean, wow, there's really, it was not an issue anywhere in the campaign, and it doesn't matter what a candidate's sexual preference is. It's probably at this point also not important whether they smoke marijuana or not, because it's now legal in Washington state. All of those issues brought some national attention to the Northwest, and especially in Seattle, and people are very disappointed all across the country and all around the world about the failure of Initiative 522 for labeling genetically modified food. I actually interviewed Dr. Vandana Shiva, too, who's a world expert on biodiversity, and she was saying that, the whole planet is watching, Washington State. And just from a political pundit's point of view, the way they were able to do that is most people don't realize that most of the counties in the eastern part of Washington State, on the east side of the Cascade Mountains, dominated by Republicans.
Right,
so we have
very
a political
conservative
divide in the state, and it's come up many times in past elections where people on the east side are not happy with folks around the Puget Sound and Seattle and Tacoma who seem to outvote them on a lot of these statewide measures. But this time, the corporations were able to convince the farmers and the voters in eastern Washington to go against 522. So that's where a lot of the no votes came from.
What was the turnout like in Seattle and in, for that matter, western Washington State?
Well, it wasn't huge, being a so-called off-year election, so we're talking in the upper 50s. Yeah, so it wasn't a huge turnout. These are mail-only ballots, so people were actually still dropping off their ballots and mailing them on Tuesday. That's why the election results are coming in late. But at this point, the city council race is actually a statistical tie, so we'll see if they try to get a recount for the Occupy candidate. But the No on 522 campaign have claimed the victory since since Tuesday. And the Grocery Manufacturers Association put out a statement regarding that, saying that, they want to see a nationwide legislation on this issue instead of having what they call a piecemeal state-by-state approach. It was very disappointing to people here, but it shows once again what happens when major corporations throw tons of money in an election, and sort of goes back to Citizens United. Our state attorney general filed a complaint against the Grocery Manufacturers Association for failing to disclose $7 million in contributions to the No on 522 campaign. So that's what we've been dealing with in Washington State.
No, it's been unbelievable, the amount of money that's been poured in by corporations, going back to obviously last year's election, and particularly in the primaries with the Adelsons of the world and so forth. We're talking with Mark Taylor-Canfield here on the Jeff Santos Show. He covers politics out in the western part of the country, particularly in the Seattle, Washington area. And I'm interested in the idea of what is happening in Washington, moving south, moving east, outside. We here on the East Coast were very excited about the fact that we had a pro-labor and progressive mayor win here with Marty Walsh, and of course just south in New York, Mr. de Blasio was concerned about the disparity of wealth, not only in New York City but around the country. So there are some good things here, and the idea is to kind of go west and kind of meet in the middle with our friends from what they're doing in Portland and San Francisco. But is it happening where we're seeing, other parts of the country, and maybe we're seeing it slowly, maximize in certain parts of California, which were one time very red, now more purple. Is that what we're seeing in the West and the West Coast as a whole? That there obviously are red areas, whether it's in eastern Oregon or eastern Washington. Are you seeing, though, the suburbs that were once, sort of purple, now more blue? Is there expansion going on in that part of the country?
Yes, there is, and that's something that I try to talk about whenever I get a chance. I would say that the most obvious trend is in the western part of the state, where formerly Republican counties like Lewis County, which is just south of the state capital of Olympia, are now turning towards the Democrats. And you'll see a Green Party office and a food co-op and really interesting things happening in some of those counties as people from the major cities and from more liberal areas like Thurston County and Olympia, the state capital, move south. Definitely that's changing. On the eastern side of the mountains, I can tell you, Jeff, that a couple of years ago there were some radicals on the east side suggesting the idea of secession, or at least dividing the state in two, because there is a major political divide here. And I was personally surprised, and so were a lot of my colleagues, about the strength of the no on 522 vote coming from Spokane, because we assumed that Spokane County would be a place where that kind of more open-minded liberalization would be going on. But really, they voted 60% against. And also Pierce County, where Tacoma, Washington is based, which is a major, major port, and right next to a major military base, they voted against it as well, only by a few percentage points. But it's just surprising to me and some others who have been watching the Washington state political scene to see how the divide continues and how polarized it is, just like the rest of the country. So it seems to be a reflection of things that have been happening on a national scale. And by the way, I wanted to mention that one of the reasons that folks up here think that Ed Murray actually won the mayor's office race is because Mike McGinn, who started out as a real sort of neighborhood activist, tended to side with the police department when it came time for reforms, because the U.S. Justice Department had an 8-month review of the Seattle Police Department and found a policy of excessive use of force. So that was an issue where he seemed to be weak in the polls, and a lot of his former supporters switched over to Murray. And the other thing that happened, and this is very unique to Seattle, is that Mike McGinn was supported by a lot of the local music industry and club owners, because Seattle is very much a music place. Sure. And he made promises about keeping nightclubs open till 4 a.m. and making it more like Austin, Texas, or maybe New York City. But in the end, none of that happened. So a lot of the people in the entertainment and club industry jumped over to Ed Murray's campaign as well. It was people who were just sort of disappointed. Now, with Greg Nichols, McGinn's predecessor, it had more to do with the fact that he was in the pocket of the developers, because there's amazing amount of development going on with Amazon and Google corporate headquarters moving into Seattle. In my neighborhood, you might actually hear the pile drivers as we speak, because there's construction going on everywhere. But in this case, it was more about police reform and lack of support for the music industry. So most of the articles that people are writing are pointing to those two major factors as to why we have a new mayor. And when I interviewed him, I asked him, Seattle obviously has a new face, so do you think that's important? And he said that what he really thinks is important is consistent management of city government, which he and a lot of other folks felt McGinn sort of fell down on. Mike McGinn did not get along with the city council, neither did Greg Nichols. The city council is separate from the mayor's office in Seattle. They have an adversarial sort of relationship. Right. In some cities, the mayor actually sits on the council, but in Seattle, they are definitely two different political bodies, so there tends to be some tension. We're sort of hoping that Ed Murray can bring everybody together around the table and talk things out and move ahead, because Seattle is a very progressive place, setting all sorts of new standards and adopting cutting-edge political philosophies. So I think that a lot of people are still looking at us, hoping that we can continue to blaze the trail for other cities and other states.
Mark, it's always great catching up with you. Mark Taylor-Canfield has been our guest here, and it's always a pleasure. All the best out there, and we'll continue to check in with you to see how the state really takes a leadership role in this country and across this country. Great to have you on. All the best, Mark.
You too, Jeff. Take care. Have fun.
Thank you. You too. We'll be back after this timeout right here on the Jeff Santos Show.